Be honest, Gordon, she'd be worthless in a real office. Vivian's been out of the game too long. Terrence said it with a full glass of Cabernet in his hand. At a dinner table his wife had spent 6 hours preparing, in front of the one man whose opinion he worshipped more than anything on this earth. Then he laughed. Gordon Reeves laughed too, the polite kind. The kind you give your ambitious sales director when he says something ugly at his own table. Gordon's wife stared at her plate. And Vivian Cole did not flinch. She refilled Gordon's glass. She asked about their daughter at Mizzou. She served the peach cobbler, with perfectly steady hands. Here is what nobody tells you about being erased in your own dining room. Something inside you goes very, very quiet. And quiet is not the same as gone. Vivian Cole, 46 years old. Kansas City, Missouri, married 14 years to Terrence Cole, regional sales director at Meridian Freight, one of the biggest trucking and logistics companies in the Midwest. One son, Elliot, 19, studying industrial engineering at Iowa State. Mostly because he grew up watching his mother sketch warehouse layouts on napkins. Because before Vivian was Terrence's wife who does a little consulting, his phrase, always delivered with a small dismissive wave. She was a director of supply chain operations. 3 distribution centers. 200 employees. A 6 Sigma black belt, and a reputation, in a very specific corner of the logistics world, for walking into broken warehouses and making them profitable. She walked away from all of it 9 years ago. She was about to remember why that mattered. Quick pause, because this story is about to go somewhere you do not expect. Wherever you're listening from tonight, Memphis, Baltimore, Toronto, a parking lot on your lunch break, put your city in the comments, because I read every one of them, and stories like this belong to all of us. If this channel has ever kept you company, the subscribe button is right there. And here's my honest question for you. And I want real answers. Sitting at that dinner table, hearing your own husband call you worthless in front of his boss, do you speak up in the moment? Or do you stay silent? Think about your answer. Because what happened in a Monday morning leadership meeting at Meridian Freight, exactly 6 months after that dinner, is something employees of that company still talk about. But before I can take you into that conference room, you need to understand how a woman becomes invisible inside her own house, one small surrender at a time. Terrence Cole was not a monster. That's the part people never want to hear. He was charming. He was funny at parties. He remembered birthdays, coached Elliot's middle school basketball team, and could sell freight contracts to companies that didn't even own trucks. When Vivian met him at a logistics conference in St. Louis in 2010, she was the one on stage, presenting a warehouse turnaround that had saved her company $4 million a year. Terrence came up afterward, held out his hand, and said, "You just made my entire quarter look like a rounding error, and I'd like to buy you a terrible conference coffee." She laughed. He was quick, warm, easy to be around. 2 years later they were married in a small ceremony overlooking the Missouri River. And Vivian genuinely believed she had found a partner who understood her world, because he lived in it too. But you need to understand something about Terrence, because it explains everything that came later without excusing any of it. Terrence grew up in Springfield watching his father get laid off from a manufacturing plant at 49. He watched his mother pick up double shifts as a hospital administrator, watched her start out earning his father, and watched his parents' marriage rot from the inside because his father could not survive being the smaller one in the room. His parents divorced when Terrence was 16. He never said it out loud, not once in 14 years of marriage. But Vivian eventually understood. Somewhere deep in that man lived a terrified teenager, who had decided the only safe marriage was one where he was never ever second. For the first few years it didn't show. It didn't have to. They both worked, both traveled, both won. Then Elliot came, and Meridian offered Terrence the regional director role. More money, more travel, more prestige. And they had the conversation that so many couples have, the one that sounds like teamwork in the moment, and reveals itself later for what it really was. "One of us needs to be the home base," Terrence said, holding her hand across their kitchen table. "Just for a few years, Viv. Your career will always be there. You're the best in the business. The business will wait. The business does not wait." Anyone who has stepped out of a career knows this. But Vivian said yes, because she loved her son, because she loved her husband, and because she believed, and this is the sentence that should break your heart a little, she believed it was a loan, not a payment. In the beginning, the arrangement even looked fair. Terrence traveled Monday through Thursday. Vivian ran the house, raised Elliot, managed the money, the school forms, the aging parents on both sides, the 400 invisible decisions a week that keep a family upright. And when people asked her, at church, at Elliot's games, at neighborhood barbecues, what she did, she watched something happen in their eyes when she said, "I'm home with our son right now." A small dimming. A polite recalibration. As if the woman who had once stood on a conference stage explaining a $4 million turnaround had been quietly swapped out for someone who needed the recipe explained twice. She kept a thread alive anyway. Small consulting contracts under her own name. Cole Operations Group. A company of exactly one. A warehouse audit here. A routing analysis there. She renewed her certifications every cycle, at her own expense, at their kitchen table after Elliot went to bed. She stayed sharp the way some people keep a garden. Quietly, daily, without applause. And Terrence's respect for her, slowly, quietly, curdled into something else. The first cut came at Meridian's Christmas party, maybe 4 years in. A senior executive asked what Vivian did, and before she could open her mouth, Terrence draped an arm around her shoulders and said, "This is my wife, she holds down the fort, so I can do all this." Then, he steered the conversation to freight rates. Vivian stood there with a glass of wine and a smile she had to manufacture, and told herself it was nothing. A clumsy phrase. Party talk. The second cut had a dollar figure attached. Terrence's territory was hemorrhaging money, late deliveries, empty return miles, drivers quitting. He brought the problem home, frustrated, and Vivian did what she does. She spent 3 weekends building him a routing and load consolidation model, walked him through it line by line, taught him how to present it. Within 2 quarters his region's margin jumped almost 9%. He got a bonus. He got a mention in the company newsletter. At the celebration dinner, with his colleagues around the table, someone asked how he'd cracked it, and Terrence smiled and said, "Honestly? I just stopped listening to consultants and trusted my gut." She was sitting right next to him. He never once looked at her. The third cut was the smallest, and somehow it was the one that stayed under her skin like a splinter. Last Thanksgiving, at his sister's house in Lee's Summit, Vivian mentioned she'd just recertified her 6 Sigma black belt. Terrence actually chuckled and said, to the whole table, "Viv likes to play office. Keeps her busy." His sister laughed. His brother-in-law laughed. Even the teenagers smirked. Because when the room laughs, children learn who it is safe to laugh at. And between those 3 moments, there were 100 smaller ones that no story has room for. The way he started answering questions addressed to her. The way her opinion on his work went from sought, to tolerated, to interrupted. The way he'd say we decided about decisions she had never been consulted on, and she decided about anything that went wrong. None of it was loud. That's the trap. If he had hit her, she'd have left in a week. If he had cheated, her sister would have helped her pack. But there is no hotline for being slowly reduced. There is no support group for women whose husbands simply, gradually, stopped believing they were anyone. 3 moments. Years apart. The same laugh every time, the one he used at the Christmas party, the one he used at the celebration dinner, the one he used over Thanksgiving turkey. Vivian had started to recognize it the way you recognize a smell. It was the laugh of a man reassuring himself that his wife was smaller than him. And still, she stayed soft toward him. That's the thing about slow erosion, every single grain of it is deniable. He was a good father, he was affectionate on Sundays. He wasn't cheating, wasn't drinking, wasn't cruel in any way you could photograph. If you had asked Vivian 1 year ago whether her marriage was in trouble, she would have said no, and she would have believed herself. Then came the dinner. It was supposed to be Terrence's big night. Gordon Reeves, Senior Vice President, the man who would decide whether Terrence made VP before 50, was coming to dinner with his wife Paula. Terrence had been wound tight about it for 2 weeks. Vivian did what she had done for 14 years. She made it happen. Braised short ribs. The good tablecloth. Fresh flowers on the sideboard. 6 hours of work, invisible by design. Dinner went beautifully. Gordon was gracious, Paula was warm, and Vivian, who could read a room the way other people read a menu, kept the conversation moving through every silence. Then, over dessert, Gordon turned to her with genuine interest and asked, "Vivian, Terrence tells me you have an operations background. What kind of work did you do?" She got 4 words out. "I ran distribution for..." "Oh, that was a lifetime ago." Terrence cut in, wine glass raised, smiling wide. "Be honest, Gordon, she'd be worthless in a real office. Vivian's been out of the game too long. She does her little projects." And he laughed. Understand what happened in that room. It wasn't just an insult. It was an answer to a question directed at her, taken out of her mouth. It was her entire professional life, 20 years of it, converted into a punchline to keep his boss's attention on him. Vivian did not flinch, did not blink. Some part of her stepped calmly out of her own body, poured Gordon more wine, and asked Paula about her garden. The dinner ended warmly. Terrence was buoyant. When the door closed behind the Reeveses, he actually kissed her forehead and said, "That went perfectly. You're amazing, at this. At this. At dinner. At being the fort." She lay awake until 4 a.m, not crying, just staring at the ceiling doing arithmetic on her own life. 14 years of marriage. 9 years since her last full-time role. 3 certifications maintained for no one. 2 decades of expertise, described to the most powerful man her husband knew, in one word. Worthless. She turned the word over in the dark like a stone she'd found in her shoe, examining it from every side, and somewhere around 3 a.m., she noticed the strangest thing. Underneath the hurt, and the hurt was real, don't let anyone tell you composed women don't bleed. Underneath it, there was something colder and infinitely more useful. Clarity. He had finally said, out loud, in company, what his behavior had been saying for years. And you cannot unhear a confession. For the next 11 days, she watched her own marriage like an auditor. Not angry. Observing, she counted how many questions he asked her in a week about her own life. The answer was 2, and one of them was where the dry cleaning was. But here's the thing about that night. It was only the wound. The discovery, the real one, the one that turned hurt into direction, came 11 days later, over coffee she almost canceled. Paula Reeves had texted her, "Just us girls, my treat." And somewhere between the second coffee and the check, Paula lowered her voice and said something she clearly assumed Vivian already knew. "You know, Gordon was so disappointed a couple of years back, when the Cedar Ridge warehouse project fell apart, he wanted to bring you in to fix it. He'd heard about your Springfield turnaround from someone at the conference. He asked Terrence to connect you." Paula stirred her coffee. "Terrence told him you'd stepped away for good, said you weren't interested in working anymore." The room went very still. "He asked twice, actually," Paula added. "There was an ops analytics role last year too." Terrence said the same thing. Twice, not once. Twice, her husband's boss had tried to hire her by name, by reputation. And her husband had stood in the doorway of her own life, and quietly told the world she wasn't home. Vivian smiled. Thanked Paula. Drove home with her hands at 10 and 2, radio off, doing 40 in a 40. She did not scream into the steering wheel. She did not call Terrence. She sat in the driveway for 6 full minutes, and when she finally spoke, out loud, alone in the car, it was one sentence. "Okay, now I know." Because this was no longer about a cruel joke at a dinner party. A joke is weather. This was climate. Terrence hadn't just failed to see her value, he had actively hidden it, intercepted it, buried it, because a wife with a title threatened something in him that a wife with a casserole did not. That night, she cooked dinner. Asked Elliot about his classes on speakerphone, laughed at Terrence's story about a client. And after the house went dark, she sat at the kitchen table, where she had once built his routing model, opened her laptop, and wrote an email to the one person on Earth who had never once needed her to be small. Constance Boyd. Her old mentor. Subject line, "You once told me to call you when I was done waiting." Constance Boyd was 61 years old, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had spent 30 years terrifying underperforming executives across the freight industry. She had hired Vivian as an analyst 2 decades ago, and promoted her 3 times, and these days, Constance was an operating partner at Kestrel Partners, a private equity firm out of Chicago that specialized in buying broken logistics companies and fixing them. They met for lunch 2 days later. Constance listened to exactly 4 minutes of the story before she held up one hand. "I'm going to stop you," she said. "Because I have a confidentiality agreement I need you to sign before I say another word." Vivian signed. "Kestrel is in diligence on an acquisition," Constance said. "A Midwest freight company. Decent brand, terrible operations. Their central region is bleeding, margins collapsed, warehouses are a mess, and the numbers they present don't survive contact with their own loading docks. I need someone who can tear their operations apart and tell me what's real." 90-day contract. Brutal hours. Your kind of work. "Which company?" Vivian asked. Constance slid a folder across the table. Meridian Freight. Vivian looked at that folder for a long moment. Her husband's company. Her husband's region, the central region. The one whose turnaround he had taken credit for. The one that had quietly slid right back into losses the moment her spreadsheet aged out of relevance. Constance, you know my husband works there. I know exactly where your husband works, Constance said, and looked at her over the reading glasses. The enda covers him too. You cannot say one word about this at home. Can you live with that? And Vivian realized something almost funny. For years, Terrence had kept her career a secret from his company. Now his company would be a secret she kept from him. The symmetry of it was so clean, it felt like the universe signing its own name. I can live with that, she said. What followed were 3 of the most alive months of Vivian's life. Officially, she told Terrence she'd landed a decent consulting contract. Supply chain stuff. Nothing exciting. He said that's nice, babe, without looking up from his phone, which was exactly what she needed him to do. Then, she went to work. She flew to distribution centers in Des Moines, Tulsa, Columbus. She walked floors at 5 in the morning in a hard hat and steel toes. She interviewed dock supervisors who hadn't been listened to in a decade. She rebuilt Meridian's cost model from the pallet up, and what she found was worse than Kestrel feared, and better than Vivian could have designed. The Central Region's reporting was cosmetically inflated. Efficiency numbers were being massaged upstream, layer by layer, by managers protecting their bonuses. And at the top of that region's reporting chain, polishing those numbers into slide decks for Gordon Reeves, was a regional sales director named Terrence Cole. There was a morning in Tulsa she never told anyone about. A dock supervisor named Ray, 31 years with the company, walked her through a receiving bay that had been misconfigured for 6 years. 6 years of wasted labor hours, all of it flagged in reports that went up the chain and evaporated. When she finished asking her questions, Ray took off his cap and said, "Ma'am, you're the first person from any office who's ever stood on this dock and listened all the way to the end of a sentence." Vivian drove back to her hotel, sat in the parking lot, and let herself feel the full size of what had been taken from her, not by the industry, which clearly still had a place for her, but by one man's fear, one dinner table at a time. Then she went upstairs and worked until midnight, because feelings are information, and information belongs in the model. She reported the facts, all of them. No editorializing, no venom. Constance would have smelled venom instantly, and it would have cost Vivian her credibility. Just data, verified 3 ways, presented so cleanly that Kestrel's managing partner asked Constance, in front of the whole deal team, "Where has this woman been?" "Waiting," Constance said. Then, right at the moment everything was moving, the deal nearly died. Meridian's board balked at the price. Negotiations froze for 5 weeks. Vivian's contract went into limbo, and she was suddenly back to full-time life in the house on Cherrywood Lane, with a secret in her chest, and nowhere to put her momentum. And here is where the story gets complicated. Because Terrence, as if he could smell the change in her, got sweet. Sweet like the early years. He brought flowers on a random Tuesday. He planned a weekend in the Ozarks. He held her hand in the car and said he knew he'd been wrapped up in work stuff and wanted to do better. And Vivian, I need you to be honest with yourself about whether you'd have felt it too. Vivian wavered. 14 years is not nothing. A whole life is not nothing. She lay next to this suddenly attentive man and thought, maybe the dinner was a low point. Maybe people can be better. Maybe I tell Constance I'm out, and I tell him everything, and we rebuild. She was one day from doing exactly that. She had even rehearsed it in the shower. Terrence, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen. She had imagined his face moving through shock into something like pride. Imagine them laughing someday about the months she'd carried this secret. Imagine the dinner party story it would become. That's how close it was. That is how much of her still wanted the version of him she'd married at the river. Then, on a Thursday evening, she came downstairs to grab Elliot's care package for the post office, and heard Terrence in his office, on the phone with his brother, relaxed, laughing. Nah. Things are good, man. Viv's calmed down. She had some little contract thing going for a while. Honestly, it was the best thing for us. Kept her busy. Kept her off my back. It wrapped up, so a pause. That laugh. No, trust me. She's happiest at home. Some people just are. Vivian stood in the hallway holding a box of her son's favorite cookies, and every soft thing in her chest quietly turned to stone. She didn't confront him. There was no longer anything to confront. No misunderstanding to clear up. No better version of him hiding behind a bad phrasing. This was simply who he was when he thought she couldn't hear him. She walked to the post office, mailed the package, sat in the car and sent Constance a single text. Whatever happens with the deal, I'm in. All the way. 2 weeks later, Meridian's board blinked. The acquisition closed in early spring. And then Constance called her into Kestrel's temporary office in downtown Kansas City, closed the door, and made an offer Vivian had stopped letting herself imagine 9 years ago. We're replacing Meridian's operations leadership. I want you as Senior Vice President of Operations, Central Region. You'd own every warehouse, every route, every efficiency number from Ohio to Oklahoma. Constance paused, and for the first time in 20 years, her voice went gentle. Vivian, every sales director in that region would report their operational performance up through your office, including him. So think carefully, because I'm not offering you revenge. I'm offering you a job you're the best available candidate for. And I need to know you can run it like that's the only reason you're there. Vivian took the full 48 hours. She walked the trail at Loose Park. She called Elliot, told him only that she'd been offered a big role, the old life, bigger, and her 19-year-old son went quiet, and then said, "Mom, you've been coaching me my whole life for stuff like this. Take it." She took it. Monday morning. 9 a.m. Meridian Freight Headquarters, Kansas City. Full leadership, all hands, every director, every VP, every regional manager. Some 90 people in the big conference center, plus offices dialed in from 4 states. New ownership's first official address. Terrence sat third row, best suit, fresh haircut, because the rumor mill said Kestrel would be announcing the new executive team, and Terrence had convinced himself, of course he had, that his name was on that slide. The room smelled like fresh coffee and nervous cologne. Acquisitions do that to a building. Everyone laughing a little too easily. Everyone counting exits. Gordon Reeves opened the meeting, thanked everyone, introduced Kestrel. Constance Boyd spoke for 6 minutes about the road ahead. Then she said it. Operations is where this company will be rebuilt. So I want to introduce the person who will lead that rebuild. She spent 2 decades running distribution networks across this industry. She led the operational diligence on this very acquisition, which means she already knows your warehouses better than most people in this room. Please welcome your new Senior Vice President of Operations, Central Region, Vivian Cole. Vivian walked in from the side door. Charcoal suit, badge on a steel clip, heels on polished concrete, click click click. The only sound in a room of 90 people. Because a good number of them knew exactly whose wife was walking to that podium. Heads turned. Somebody whispered. Somewhere in the third row, a coffee cup stopped halfway to a mouth and never completed the journey. Terrence's face did something Vivian would remember for the rest of her life. Confusion first, then recognition. Then, in real time, in front of everyone, the arithmetic, the consulting contract, the travel, the months of it. His wife had been inside his company's numbers the entire time, and every massage spreadsheet he'd ever polished had crossed her desk. She reached the podium, adjusted the mic 1 inch, looked out at the room, and did not look at him longer than she looked at anyone else. That was the discipline. That was the whole game. "Good morning," she said. "I've spent the last several months in your buildings, Des Moines, Tulsa, Columbus. I've been on your docks at 5 a.m., and I want to start by saying this. Your problems are not your people. Your people are the best thing this company has. Your problems are your systems, and systems can be fixed. That's why I'm here. Starting next week, my team audits every operational report in this region against floor-level reality. Not to punish anyone, to find the truth. Because you cannot fix what you're still lying to yourself about." 90 seconds. Clean, not one syllable about him. She didn't need one. The room supplied the electricity all by itself. The private conversation came that afternoon, because it had to. Terrence appeared in the doorway of her new office, closed the door without asking, and came apart. 6 months, he said, voice shaking. "You've been doing this for 6 months. You humiliated me in front of the entire company. Was this the plan, Vivian? Is this revenge? You couldn't just..." "Sit down, Terrence." He sat. 14 years. And it was the first time she had ever said anything to him in that tone. It worked the first time. "I signed an NDA. I couldn't tell you, the same way you couldn't tell me Gordon Reeves tried to hire me." Twice, she watched that land. Watched him go pale, then look at the floor. Because there is no answer for that, and some part of him had always known this bill would come. "I didn't take this job to hurt you. I took it because I earned it, years ago, and again these past months, in your warehouses, with your numbers. You told a room of people I'd be worthless in a real office." She leaned back, calm as still water. "Worthless is just value nobody bothered to measure. Somebody finally measured. The audit did what audits do. It didn't target Terrence. It targeted everything. Which was worse for him. Because the central region's inflated reporting unraveled in a matter of weeks. And the trail of the famous gut instinct turnaround led straight back to a routing model with file metadata from a home computer on Cherrywood Lane, created on 3 weekends he had spent golfing. Nobody fired him. They didn't have to. He was quietly moved off the leadership track, and by summer he resigned to pursue other opportunities. Vivian signed off on a fair severance without comment, because she had promised Constance, and herself, that she would run the region like the job was the only reason she was there. It was never gloating that she wanted, it was gravity. Things simply, finally, weighed what they actually weighed. The divorce papers were served in June. He didn't contest. It's been a while now. Vivian still runs operations for the central region, and the numbers, the real ones, are the best they've been in a decade. Elliot spent part of his summer shadowing her through 3 warehouses, hard hat and all, and told his roommate his mom was kind of famous in trucking, which she pretends not to love. She and Terrence speak when they need to. It's civil. He's in Springfield now, working for a smaller firm, and by all accounts doing the quieter work of figuring out how he became a man who needed his wife to be small. She genuinely hopes he finishes that work. From a distance. But here's what I keep coming back to in this story, and it's not the conference room, as good as that moment was. It's the kitchen table. All those nights, all those years, when Vivian renewed certifications nobody asked about, and kept a one-woman company alive that her own husband called playing office. Nobody applauded that. There were no witnesses. And that, the unwitnessed years, is where this whole story was actually won. The Monday morning was just the receipt. And I want to be careful here, because this is not a story telling you that every wound gets a conference room. Most don't. Most vindication in this life is smaller and slower and entirely private. A degree finished at 50. A business that finally breaks even. A morning you wake up and realize you believe yourself again. Vivian's Monday just happened to have witnesses. Because being underestimated quietly does something dangerous to the person doing the underestimating, it makes them careless. And it does something powerful to you. If you let it, it gives you room to build in the dark. Vivian never argued with Terrence about her worth. Not once. You cannot argue someone into seeing you. You can only keep becoming, until the day the lights come on. So I'll leave you with the question this story has been asking from the very first line. Someone in your life, a husband, a boss, a family member, has underestimated you. Maybe out loud, at a dinner table. Maybe silently, for years. What did you do about it? And if you're still in the middle of it, what are you building in the dark right now? Tell me in the comments, along with your city, because somebody scrolling tonight needs to read your answer more than you know. Take care of yourselves. And remember, quiet is not the same as gone.